Well, let's now speak to Zeidon Alkinani. He's an analyst and researcher specializing in identity politics in Iraq, and he joins us now from here in Doha. Mr. Zeidon, the economic situation still incredibly dire for so many. Given the ebbing momentum that we're now seeing with these protests, is anything likely still to change?
Well, the main changes that we could say is that the protest movement, after 1 year since its outbreak, is still very powerful. It's very significant. Iraq, after the October Revolution, is not the same Iraq as before the October Revolution. The youth is very well organized. They're very politically aware. The October Revolution is a youth-led grassroots movement that is standing up against the political elite, whether it is in the government or in the militias or political parties that are governing or controlling or influencing the Iraqi political arena and economics from beyond the government. Activists, peaceful activists, were still targeted directly. They were still kidnapped and assassinated throughout the following past months. Just before the 1 year commemoration or the anniversary of the October Revolution. Not much has changed. Maybe in the early stages of the October Revolution last year, we saw the resignation of the Prime Minister and the announcement of a possible resignation by the President. These are symbolic achievements of the youth protest movement, the October Revolution in Iraq, yet we don't have drastic changes that are happening. It's still the same parliament, still the same political parties that are governing the country. Unemployment and rampant corruption still exists in Iraq. The October Revolution currently is not only focusing and targeting the political status quo in Iraq, but it's also demanding to get the justice of the assassinated peaceful protesters. Over 600 peaceful protesters were killed since last year. Prime Minister Mustafa Kadhimi promised to set up a committee to investigate behind the assassinations of those peaceful protesters, and nothing has been put forward to the public as of yet now.
I want to ask you more about that, because you mentioned arrests too. I mean, it does appear that a crackdown on activists has been escalating in recent months. Even while the PM, I understand, has been offering some other protest leaders relatively high-profile positions. What is his strategy here?
Well, the strategy is that there's a political strategy to try to infiltrate into the protest movement. As your correspondent mentioned, that there is some violence happening probably from both sides, and particularly in the protest movement. I would disagree with that, because just as we acknowledge the fact that the military forces and the police forces in Iraq are infiltrated with some of the militias that are the armed wings of the political parties in Iraq that are probably causing the political destability or the security tactique they create to transform the revolution from a peaceful one into an armed one. There is also an infiltration into the protest movement, which we realized happening in December and January when the Sadrist movement tried to infiltrate into the secular and youth-led protest movement and switch it into an arena of political conflicts and disagreements rather than a pure grassroots uprising led by the youth against the political class.
Well, let me ask you about the road from here then. New elections have been promised for June next year, I believe. Where do you see this dynamic then going in the lead up to those elections?
Well, it also goes back to the main point of the protest movement. They don't want to see any new elections or any new governments being formed under the same political influence. We still have the ethno-sectarian quota, which distributes the main political positions in the government according to an ethnic sectarian distribution between the political parties that are politically dominating those ethnic sectarian groups. People in Iraq want to see qualified, independent politicians leading the government and being able to rewrite the constitution that was written under the influence of an occupation. New elections, new governments, new prime ministers don't really answer the demands of the protesters when they come from the same political influence and from the same political elite under the same political agendas and interests that are being pushed by regional power interests and many domestic religious and political groups.
Well, we'll continue watching those dynamics very closely here on Al Jazeera. Zeidon Alkinani there, an analyst in identity politics in Iraq. Thanks for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Now, the United Nations and the African